I'm Steve at Jackson Interfaith Shelter, and today with me is Angelita Gunn, who is the Executive Director of the Aware Shelter. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So starting out, just tell a little bit about yourself. How did you find yourself in the role as Executive Director at Aware, and how long have you been there?
Oh gosh. So how far back in history do you want me to go?
Infancy.
Well, let me just tell you first, I'm homegrown, born and raised here in Jackson, Michigan.
Okay.
And graduated from Jackson High School and alumni from Michigan State University.
Class of 99, right?
Class of, yeah, I wish. So graduated of MSU,
Okay.
bachelor's in psychology, but I started my education higher ed at University of Minnesota. I moved to Minnesota after graduation and lived there for 18 years.
Okay.
And it was there that I started doing work on domestic violence. And so I was a college student 2 years in, and I had an advisor who said, hey, I had this job description come across my desk, and you're feisty. I think this would be a good place for you to work.
Good description.
Yeah, so I was like, So anyway, I applied for a job as administrative assistant in a small nonprofit, and it was the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women.
Okay.
So when I got there and started learning about domestic violence, it was really clear that I was very much closer to the issue that I knew. I recognized my family, and I recognized people in my community, family members, neighbors, who it was very clear that they were living in homes where one partner was using violence against the other. And so at that time, it was almost like a epiphany or a lightning bolt, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be my life's work. I'm committed to this, and I'm committed for all the people that I knew and all the people that I know who were survivors of domestic violence. And so that was back in 1984. It's a long time ago. And so I spent 18 years in the Twin Cities, and I moved back. I have family here, a lot of family, including my mother. So I moved back in 1999, and when I moved back, I started working for the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And there I started as a program manager, really coordinating and managing trainings. But because of all the experience I brought to that role, they immediately put me in the position of associate director, which is brand new. They had never had an associate director before. But I was able to help develop programs. I have had a vast experience with fundraising and writing grants and training and community organizing. And so I brought all that experience to the coalition. One of the other things that I was able to do while I was there, which was really exciting, was to get into the public policy or the policy advocacy work that the coalition does, both at the federal level and here at the state. And so I was kind of one of the three people who would go to Congress and meet with legislators whenever there was bills that might affect victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I did that in Washington, D.C., many trips to Washington, and then also here at the state. And also was one of the people who was responsible for writing position papers on legislation that we were either supporting or opposing.
Right.
And we wanted our point of view brought to the table. So was always watching Aware. This is my neighborhood, or my community, I should say, born and raised here in Jackson. So I was kind of always watching, like, what's going on with the local domestic violence program, and knew the previous executive directors, Shirley Pascal and Becky, of course now we got Becky Phillip. So just kind of watching what was happening here, and when the opportunity came to apply for the director position, I took it.
Yeah.
So 7 years in August, I will be the executive director of Aware.
Okay.
And I will say, just a point of interest, that is my first stint as executive director. But I love being there. I'm just obviously a heartfelt commitment to survivors. And yeah, I think they do great work in the community, and I enjoy being the representative to the public.
It's neat seeing how your life journey kind of led to this point, and all the different pieces coming together, because I'm sure making policy and the fundraising and all the other things, but also just having a heart for the situation comes into play. So how long has Aware Shelter been in existence, and can you just kind of describe how it started? Has it been pretty similar since then, or has it evolved in different ways? And so give some of that background.
Yes, very good question. So I'm going to say from now on, let's call it Aware Incorporated.
All right.
So that's part of what's helpful and part of what I've been trying to do since I've been there as the executive director is to help the public understand that we're much more than just an emergency shelter. And so depending on who you speak to and depending on which bylaws you pay attention to, the organization's genesis was 69 or 1976, depending on, again, at one point it was a crisis line it was a substance abuse crisis line, and a coordinator at the time decided to piggyback on that crisis line and started answering calls for victims of domestic violence who were seeking safety or had questions about what was happening or didn't know where else to turn. And so it would have been in the early 1970s. And it turned from a crisis line and providing safe kind of temporary emergency housing in private homes. So at that time it was a safe home network. And that was pretty typical of domestic violence programs that started in that time period, was to rely on private citizens to open their homes to people. But the first shelter opened in 1976. So we're only in the second building that we've ever been in. And started out, we are known as what's called a shelter-based program, but we provide a lot more than just emergency housing. We're now a comprehensive program. We respond to the issues of both domestic violence and sexual assault. So I like to remind people that we work with crime victims, and that it happens that the specific niche that we fill or the expertise that we provide is in the area of domestic violence and sexual assault. And so in addition to emergency temporary housing, we have counselors on staff, and they are versed and understand the issues of domestic violence and sexual assault, and particularly the trauma and what it's like to live with somebody who hurts you. There's a lot of, self-blame that sometimes victims carry in a very different way than any other crime. So we also have advocates who work in the courthouse. So in the case where people are seeking remedies through the court, or there happens to be court intervention, so that could look like your partner being arrested over the weekend because somebody called the cops. And so what's happening next? Victims always have a lot of questions about what does it mean? What's happening next? What does it mean for me moving forward? So there's always lots of questions when there's any kind of police or court intervention. And then we also have what we call just crisis response. And that's anything from a crisis call. So we have a crisis line that's answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And people can call and get questions answered or just talk to somebody, a supportive person on the other line. And then we also have people who are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to respond if there's a sexual assault crime. So they might meet somebody at the hospital who's shown up because they have injuries or they've been sexually assaulted and they want a medical exam. So we'll dispatch an advocate to go and sit with them, be a supportive person, and then talk to them about what next steps might be for them as a victim of crime. So yes, we're more than a shelter.
Much more.
We're much more than a shelter. We also collaborate in the community. You're a good example of that. We talk on a regular basis about how can we work together, how can we make sure that our staff are working together. How can we refer back and forth? What are opportunities that we can work together to, because we know, you know, and I know that we oftentimes are seeing some of the same people.
Yeah.
So yeah, we collaborate. We provide training in the community. I happen to be a trainer for the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards on the domestic violence response to police response to domestic violence, the police response to sexual assault. So yeah, we do a lot more than shelter.
So you said that the current location on Michigan Avenue is actually your second location.
Yes.
So where were you at originally?
So it's the building that's almost directly behind us, and
Okay.
at one point it was a homeless facility for youth.
Okay.
So it's right across from the high school, and now I'm quite sure it's apartment buildings. So so yes, and at the time it was block grant, community CDBG funding from the state, or excuse me, the
Community
city.
Development Block Grant.
Yes, Community Development Block Grant. Thank you. I'm always stumbling over that acronym and those words, but and then some private foundations that provided the seed money to open the shelter.
Okay. So what would a normal, well, there's no normal situation probably, but you know, so you have, well, I guess so one question would be, at your actual housing facility, how many can you serve at any given time at once? And then how many would you typically say you would see within a given year?
Yep. Wow, so good questions. So first, I think it's really good to put out there something that people may not think about. When I go and do presentations in the community and I help kind of lay this out this way, it's not always clear to people. Mm-hmm. So how I see our services is that there are different points of entry. Mm-hmm. So some people are in a home where there's domestic violence. So their partner is using abusive tactics. Mm-hmm. And they're in a situation where it's now untenable and they just can't live there anymore. And so they call our crisis line and they might want emergency shelter. They might say, yep, I need to get out. It's, you know, it's to the point where I'm feeling very unsafe, or my partner is making threats against my life, or against my children, and I need to leave, and they will come to emergency shelter. So that's what we call imminent danger. And or it might be a scenario where my partner has left, but in the meantime, they're parked outside of my house on a regular basis. They're following me to work, or they're following me to school, or whatever it is. So their partner is continuing to try and intimidate and use violent and intimidation tactics. And so that would be imminent danger. And so they call and they want to come to the shelter. So they come to the shelter, we provide them temporary respite. And then while they're there, we help them kind of plan for next steps. So we call that case management, but it really is about what's next. You know, you're here and you can be here for the next 30 days, sometimes 60, sometimes 90 days. But the point is it's temporary. So what do you want to do? What do you want to do when you leave here? And so we help them kind of assess their point where they're starting from, and then what do they need to move forward. So that can look like anything from I need a job that pays more, or I need a job period, or I've never been on public benefits and now I need to apply for public assistance, to I need a new apartment. So we help them with that. So what doesn't happen is this. They come to emergency shelter, and then while they're there, they make an appointment with a counselor, and they work with the counselor. And then while they're there, they engage with our legal advocates. Those point of entries are different people. So even though we are a 30-bed facility in a 5-bedroom home, so think about that for a moment.
Not very good at math.
Yeah. So 30 beds in 5 bedrooms, right? So if you broke it down equally, it's at least 6 beds per room. So what that means is that there are multiple families that are living in cohabitating. Of course, you know that, how it works here, right? So cohabitating in having to negotiate everything from lights out to quiet time to everything.
Multiple families in the same bedroom.
Multiple families in the same bedroom, yes. So it's different than the folks who go and see our legal advocates. So at the time that they come to see our legal advocates, as I mentioned earlier, it's probably because there's been an arrest, or maybe they're not interested in coming to shelter. Maybe they're the homeowner or they're the primary person on the lease. And so what they want instead is relief from the court system. So they might come in and ask and request a personal protection order. And our staff can help them determine how to best make their case that they need safety from their partner so that they end up staying and their partner is forced to leave because of the personal protection order. And then we also have people who see our counselors. And so, the folks that come to emergency shelter aren't ready yet to talk about counseling. They don't even know what they want to do. They're not sure. They may be still thinking about reconciling with their partner. And they're not sure yet what their next steps are going to be. So they're not ready yet to sit down and talk about trauma and talk about one of the things that our counselors do very, very well is give them education on domestic violence and help them put what's happening to them in the context of these power dynamics that are occurring between their partner who uses violence and themselves. And help them also really not feel the shame and the guilt and the blame. Oftentimes they have a lot of self-blame, but they're not ready to talk about that yet. So the people who come to see our counselors are a whole different clientele, a whole different group of people that come. So we reduced occupancy during COVID, so we're down to 15 beds. We have been using hotels to provide short-term, usually a week to 2 weeks, until they can get into a shelter or until they've decided what their next steps are going to be. Pre-COVID, we served probably close to 300 people a year in emergency shelter, and then another 200 through counseling, and then another 150 to 200 through the legal advocacy program, and then through our sexual assault program, crisis response, maybe another 100 people there. So we're really, it's not just the people who are coming to the shelter who are accessing all those services. They're coming from a different point of entry, and they're not duplicated. So we do serve, I don't know, 800 people a year, depending on how many beds are used, how many hotel nights are used, and then how many people come to see counseling.
Roughly how big is your team to be able to serve that many people, especially when it's some of those really in-depth things like legal cases and counseling? That's pretty time intensive. So what does your team look like roughly?
Yeah, on a good day, when we're not looking for.
It's been a tricky season for most organizations.
It's a very tricky season for hiring and retention. We're experiencing that same dearth as every other sector. And but on an org chart, there's 25 positions. Not all of them are full time. It takes at least 8 to 10 people to run the emergency shelter alone, and we provide 24/7 coverage. The people who are in the emergency shelter are also the folks who are answering the crisis line, and so anywhere from 20 to 25 people.
How do most people find out about you? So if you're serving 600 to 800 people a year and they're going through a situation, does the police reference you, or is it just you've been around so long? How does someone know to seek you out for those types of services?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we have a really good relationship with our local law enforcement agencies. And they have, from time to time, dropped people off. But yes, so referrals come from other communities, partners, Community Action Agency, Interfaith Shelter, Department of Health and Human Services, the courts, law enforcement agencies, and then sometimes word of mouth. So, people who have gotten help and support, and it might be happening with a friend or a family member that they know, they will refer them as well. So, we get referrals from a lot of different sources. And we have been around long enough, too, that I think people call us for a lot of things, not always for domestic violence and sexual assault services. So I think we're known enough and recognized enough in the community that we're a place to start.
I know something that I was not necessarily surprised by, but I guess I hadn't thought about is I was thinking it was only a shelter for women who are experiencing domestic violence, but men can also be victims. So
Yeah.
do you have men that can stay there as well, depending on the situation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think part of where that comes from, Steve, is that we do know statistically that domestic violence and sexual assault disproportionately affects women and children. And however, we do know that there are times where in domestic violence relationships, especially, that the aggressor, the person who's using violence in that relationship, is the female partner. And so we have had men, single men. We've also had men with children who have left their relationship and they've come to seek support at Aware. They see our counselors. They come to the legal advocacy office. I think one year it was probably about 25% to 30% who came looking for relief in the courts were actually the male victim. And so yeah, in the shelter, again, navigating 30 beds in a 5-bedroom home, we do have space where if it's a male victim, he has some private space.
And then kind of as we wrap up too, I want to hit on, you've actually recently joined city council. So you're a city council member because you have so much free time. You wanted to also do that. And I appreciate your service on city council. It's always great having partners in this type of work that are sitting in those seats that bring that perspective. So I know, what your history and what you do now is going to be a huge blessing to Jackson, bringing that perspective. So you just talk real briefly about how long you've been on city council and what that looks like, and any things coming up that might intersect with some of the things that are happening within homeless services or domestic violence services.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. First of all, yes. So I was sworn in December, early December, and I don't remember the exact date.
You're a rookie.
Yeah. So very, very. I have a huge learning curve. So I just had my first ward meeting, third ward, on Monday, and yeah, it was nice. A small group. They're still acclimating, just like I am.
They took it easy on you.
Nobody was too hard on me. Nobody was too hard on me. Allies there, which was really great. Other council members showed up, and I was like, yes, my friends are here.
Good.
So yes, it's an exciting time in Jackson right now. So there are a couple of things that I know from the previous administration that were coming up in the community that inspired me to want to be a part of it. And the former council member, Jeremy Alexander, decided to run for mayor, so the seat became now open. And so that's a nice opportunity for somebody brand new to say, hey, open seat, I don't even have to run against the incumbent. So yes, so I put my hat in the ring and was surprised, quite shocked that I was elected. And thank you to all my constituents who voted for me, and thank goodness I have a lot of friends that live in Ward 3. But anyway, some of the really exciting things that are happening is first the Affordable Housing Commission, of which I have been appointed recently. And so really looking at everything when it comes to affordable housing, from home ownership to apartments, affordable apartments that are clean and dignified. Everything from, and also keeping people in their homes. So, and that could be anything from major repairs, like a roof, costing $20,000 could easily displace somebody who is low to moderate income, even if they're a homeowner. And so we're looking at everything. Right now we've only had 2 meetings, but we've got some really good people that are a cross section of people who are looking at the spectrum.
And is that the fund that some of the American Rescue Plan dollars were put into?
Yes.
So
they were earmarked specifically to look at affordable housing. And it's about $4.5 million, which I'll tell you is not going to go very far when you're thinking about all of those issues that we have.
And I think $1 million's already going to renovate 5 current houses, right?
Yes. There are 5 current houses that are being renovated. So yes, when you start looking at bricks and mortar, it's $4.5 million. It doesn't go very far. But so we're trying to be real careful, real strategic. One of the other things that is occurring is that the city is conducting a housing study now to look at things like, where do people want to live and what are their interests? Is it home ownership? Is it more rental properties? What it is that we want to look at. So, but in the very early stages, very beginning stages. But the other thing that has come up is the police oversight and community relations between the police and community. And obviously, as a person who works with victims of crime, those are issues that would be really important to me in my work and in my job. And I think Mayor Mahoney, when he did his State of the City address, he talked about Jackson being in a renaissance. And I agree. I think we're coming back from COVID, but also, we're trying to rebuild our community. There was a lot of work that was done in the downtown area. That was the focus of the previous administration, is to really build up our downtown, both in housing opportunities, but also for businesses and attracting businesses and attracting people to the downtown area, and even the streets downtown. And so I think that's all that work now has to trickle out into the communities, and especially looking at communities that have been sorely overlooked for years. We have to do what Bell Hooks calls organizing from the margins to center. That's really, social justice work is really from, taking care of the most unserved at this point, and then that wealth will move in instead of trickle down, right? So, yes, I think it's a very exciting time to be on city council. Some days I do shake my head and say, why did I think I could do this? And what am I doing here? But, and it's a big learning curve, but I'm excited about it. And I think whether or not I have the ideas, I'm willing to put in the work to do the research, to look at potential solutions that are going to work for the city overall.
I appreciate that.
Thank
I think
you.
some of the packets are 300, 400, 500 pages that you're supposed to.
Oh yeah,
Get 2 days before the meeting.
And I spend my weekends reading up late at night, and it's like, okay.
Ordinance is another fun thing like that.
Yeah, ordinances, and I'm like Googling it. It's like, what does this mean? Yeah, so it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work, and but it's when you think about potential and the outcomes, it's actually really exciting, very, very exciting. So I'm glad to be there. I think Mayor Mahoney's vision is a vision that I can absolutely get behind for the next 4 years.
Well, usually when I wrap up, I like to just ask an open-ended question. Are there any last things that you'd want to communicate to anybody? So it's pretty open-ended.
Pretty open-ended, yeah. I feel like I talked a lot, so I'm not really sure that I have anything. Yeah. So I guess I would say, we are what I would call in the crux of our work, the purpose and the vision. We provide crisis services. Absolutely, we feel that that's necessary, but we're also visionary. And, our goal is to really someday put ourselves out of business. And I know you've used that before too. And absolutely, we don't want domestic violence and sexual assault in our communities. And neither do victims. Survivors want partners that are loving and caring. They don't want partners who hurt them or hurt their children. And so I think to kind of keep in mind that there are connections with other collaborations that are essential to that work that I think we're still building. So I'm extending a hand to anybody who has an interest in working on the crisis side or working on the prevention side, or seeing a connection to, that fits with our work in this area. How can I extend a hand to Aware and work together to better our community?
So we're always looking for more partners to join in the work. That's great.
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you for what you do. It's meaningful work. It's difficult work, but it's very necessary. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Steve.